Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vermilion. Before we hop into this video of me talking your head off with statistics, I wanted to say thank you to all the new and returning subscribers. It's always awesome to see the channel grow, and while it takes effort on my end, it also requires all of you. So without you, I could not have become a better content creator in such a short amount of time. Before I get all emotional after watching this video, if you do learn something new or found this information interesting, consider subscribing or hitting that like button to show some love. And if you would like to help out or discuss certain things in this video, drop by the Discord or message me over on Twitter, both of which will be linked in the description. With all that said, let's talk about all of the upgrades that you can get inside of Vanguard zombies in a stupid amount of detail. I will be breaking this video up into three main categories: covenants, perks, and pack-a-punch. The first two will be what we talk about the most, as pack-a-punch is pretty easy to understand. So let's get started with the covenants of the game. Starting off strong with bloodlust. Get it? Because it makes us strong and allows us to punch with the force of an ox? No? Well, okay, I tried. For our base melee damage, we see that we hit for 144 damage. At blue rarity, this increases to 447 damage per melee and also heals you for 20 health each melee attack. That's a 210.42% increase in damage from base, with the added benefit of healing each hit. At purple, this turns into 720 damage, and you heal for 25 health per hit, which is a 400% increase to base melee damage. At legendary, this gets even crazier. You will start meleeing for 1,103 damage base and will receive 57 health back per melee, which is an astounding 665.97% damage increase from base. That's a little scary. It's almost a horrifying number. Anyway, you could technically get backed into a corner, spam your melee, and basically never die. This covenant is very powerful for early game inside of zombies. Next up on the block is Unholy Ground, which increases our damage while stationary. At blue rarity, that damage increase is 30%, from 30 damage to 39 damage. At purple rarity, the damage boost received is now 65.52%, from a 29 damage body shot to a 48 damage body shot. Legendary does not offer any extra damage for this covenant. However, you can activate the ability shortly after moving, meaning it's more versatile and you do not need to completely stand still when firing while using the legendary variant. Moving on, we have Motherload, and guess what? I'm explaining my testing to you because testing this was annoying and very boring, so I'm milking this. In order to test Motherload, I acquired a throwing knife. That way, after throwing the equipment, it would not be unusable. Looking at you, grenades. That way, I could continue picking it up to find the percentage chance for each rarity. After making the plan, I came over to this box and threw the knife 100 times. Yeah, 100 times for you guys. After each throw, I would count whether or not the equipment was returned. Now that you have the explanation, I'll tell you the fruits of my labor. At blue rarity, Motherload has a 20 to 21% chance to return equipment after throwing it. At purple, that chance is now raised to roughly 62%. And at legendary, the percentage basically doesn't change. However, it is possible to earn additional equipment. I tried picking up random equipment off of the ground and buying equipment. However, it never gave additional equipment. The only time it gave extra equipment was when I earned the equipment back after throwing it, which I tested twice, and out of each session of 100 throws, I only earned double equipment 5 to 7 times, averaging a 6% chance across the 2 sessions. I don't know if it's a bug that Motherload does not give extra equipment on pickup, but it would be nice if it did, especially since the chance of it actually giving double is very slim. Going down my list, next we have Dead Accurate, which increases your damage after each successive hit on a target. At blue rarity, this buff to damage is a 30% increase. At purple, the buff to damage is a 58.62% increase. And at legendary, even though the only change to the description is that you can shoot any enemy and keep the damage buff, the damage increase for the buff is actually now 100%. So Dead Accurate is a very viable choice over Unholy Ground at higher rounds. Now get ready for my favorite covenant, Coal the Weak. Coal the Weak increases damage against slowed or stunned enemies. At blue rarity, it's a 100% damage increase from 30 damage to 60 damage. At purple, the increase to damage is 200%, from 120 damage base to 360 damage per shot. And finally at legendary, which also adds that it hits for much more headshot damage as well as the additional damage overall, the base damage increase is 300%, from a 240 damage body shot to a 720 damage body shot. And while a headshot base damage was 1080 damage, after proccing Coal the Weak, I hit for 6 6,480 damage per headshot, a whopping 6 times more damage over the base headshot. Splatterfest was harder to test, but out of 100 zombies at blue rarity, there were 20 additional explosions, making the chance to explode zombies roughly 20%. At purple and legendary, it was an increase between 40 to 50% and 60 to 70% respectively, but could easily be off as it's hard to count the additional explosions at higher and higher rounds. And our last two covenants to cover I have less data on, but out of experience I can tell that the descriptions are false. Both Brain Rot and Cryo Freeze state that when shooting a zombie there's a chance to slow or turn them. However, this works more like the AATs inside of Cold War, where they are more time-based than a chance to turn a zombie, as when shooting zombies consecutively, the covenant hardly activated. However, if I waited in between each time the covenant activated, or rather waited between shooting zombies, the chance to activate the covenant was much higher even at blue rarity. So it seems that these covenants are more based on time than they are chance. So we covered just about every necessary covenant that doesn't quite explain the total damage output or how useful it can be. The covenants I won't be covering in this video though is Resurrectionist, for obvious reasons as its descriptions are pretty spot on and I just don't have friends, but to put it simply, it's just quick revive. Ammo Gremlin is hard to quantify as it happens off screen, and its legendary reloads your current weapon every second essentially. And the last covenant that we're not going to cover is Death Below, solely for the fact that the description tells you exactly how the covenant works. Now that we've summarized the covenants, let's move on to the perks of the game, starting with Fiendish Fortitude, which is basically the juggernaut of the game. At each tier, Fiendish Fortitude grants you an additional 25 health. So tier 1 is plus 25 health, tier 2 is plus 50 health, tier 3 is plus 75 health, and tier 4 is plus 100 health. Diabolical damage is the easiest to quantify next, as we have actual damage numbers for them. For reference, a headshot on the ITRA burst is 104 damage base. At tier 1, the damage is 123, or an 18.27% increase over base. At tier 2, the damage is 143, or a 37.5% increase over base. At tier 3, the damage is 163, or a 56.73% increase over base. At tier 4, the damage is 182, or a 75% increase over base. Alright, so for our last three perks, Demonic Frenzy, Ethereal Haste, and Venomous Vigor, these are hard to quantify and we need some help from myself in post. Hey yo, Pass Connor, I've already got the numbers. Thanks me. Let's continue with Demonic Frenzy. What I have done is calculated the amount of frames it takes from when the weapon reaches 0 in the magazine and the immediate frame of when that number is replaced with the mag size. So now that you know how that works, I'll play each tier right now on screen and we'll go over the percentage change. Without Demonic Frenzy, the reload took 134 frames at 60 FPS. At tier 1, this took 127 frames, which was a 5.22% increase over base. At tier 2, it took 114 frames, which was 14.93% faster over the base. At tier 3, it took 105 frames, which was 21.64% faster. And finally, at tier 4, it took 98 frames, which was 26.97% faster over base. So overall, it looks like Speed Cola was hit with a nerf this game due to the amount of magazine attachments inside of Vanguard zombies. Continuing, we have Venomous Vigor. To figure out the percentages between each tier, I started the counter at the exact frame I was hit by the zombie and ended the counter at the exact frame I gained health. At base, without the perk, it took 366 frames at 60 FPS to start regenerating health. At tier 1, it took 276 frames, or a 24.59% faster regen rate. At tier 2, it took 221 frames, or roughly a 39.62% faster regen over base. At tier 3, it took 169 frames, or 53.83% faster over base. And at tier 4, this took 111 frames, or roughly 69.97% faster health regen over base. Finally, we have come to Ethereal Haste. I tested the sprint speed only and started the counter the exact frame I started sprinting. Again, these numbers were taken at 60 FPS. Without Ethereal Haste, my run took 242 frames to complete. At tier 1, the run took 225 frames, which was 7% faster. At tier 2, the run took 202 frames, which was 16.53% faster over base. At tier 3, the run took 188 frames, which was 22.31% faster over base. And finally, at tier 4, the run took 175 frames, which was 27.69% faster. Now, while Ethereal Haste increases overall movement speed, there's a difference between walking, tack sprinting, and regular sprint. I took this test as a baseline for normal play, but for more accuracy, consistency, head on over to Insane Gamer 52's video, as he has a more detailed explanation of movement speed. A quick glimpse of his information shows us that for walking speed, these percentage increases are as follows. Tier 1 is 18% faster, Tier 2 is 26% faster, Tier 3 is 35% faster, and Tier 4 is 44% faster. So walk speed alone gets a sizable increase, which does help for late game when reloading while super sprinters are coming after you. Woo! You made it through the bulk of the information. I know it's a lot to get through, but for those of you that stuck around, I really do appreciate you. So now let's finish up that final stretch, shall we? We discussed covenants and perks, but there's one last category: Pack-a-Punch. We'll go through this quick as it's really easy to understand. We will use the ITRA burst damage as a base again, which I remind you is 30 to the body and 104 to the head to show how each tier of Pack-a-Punch changes damage. At tier 1, the damage increases by 100% to 60 damage to the body and 270 damage for a headshot. Tier 2 increases the damage by 100% again over Tier 1 to 120 damage to the body and 540 damage to the head. And you guessed it, at Tier 3 the damage is increased by 100% yet again to 240 damage to the body and 1080 damage to the head. Now there is one additional thing to consider when Pack-a-Punching, especially if you want to melee everything in your game. Pack-a-Punch actually affects your melee damage for your weapon. At base, my damage was 144 for a melee. At tier 1 PAP, this did not change at all. However, at tier 2, this melee damage increased to 288, and at tier 3, the melee damage increased to 576 damage, both tiers increasing melee damage by roughly 100% every time. So if you pair this with Bloodlust and a tier 3 Pack-a-Punch weapon, you can hit for 4,412 damage per melee while healing for 57 health. And one more thing before we wrap up this video, the headshot damage multiplier is roughly 3.47 times at base damage. However, after Pack-a-Punching, the headshot multiplier is increased to 4.5 times. So Pack-a-Punch actually increases the headshot damage even further. Well, you made it, friends. This is the end of the video. There's no more information to give. Again, I remind you that our Discord server is in the description if you would like to hang out, have discussions, or find some people to play with. Feel free to leave a comment and tell me how you feel about this information, or let me know if my calculations are just outright wrong. I love good criticism. With that said, I hope everyone has an amazing start to their week, and I hope to catch you in the next one.